Hello everyone, Charcoal here, and welcome back to Nostalgia Trip. Today we're continuing our trip through the many installments of Ninjago with the post-classic era. As I stated in the last video, Season 2 was originally meant to be the end of the series, but fan demand eventually convinced LEGO to bring it back, and so in 2014, this new era of the show kicked off with the premiere of Season 3, Rebooted. We've got a lot to get through today, as this era covers everything from Season 3 to Season 7. That's 5 full seasons plus a 1-hour special. Let's dive in. Gonna be honest, not a very strong return. The entire premise of the season is that it's themed around technology and the consequences of relying on it too much. In a show about ninjas and ancient gods and magic stuff. Who the hell thought this was a good idea? Oh, and did I mention the Overlord is back? Yeah, this genius Cyrus Borg decided to build his corporate headquarters in the same spot the Overlord was defeated last season. So now his spirit possessed the computer system and he can control anything that's connected to it, which is basically everything. And the only role technology plays in his plan is that machines exist now that can extract Lloyd's powers and turn the Overlord into the Golden Master. Now, I'm no expert, but whenever a character, usually Cyrus Borg, talks about technology, I'm pretty sure none of what they say is accurate. Something doesn't make sense, that's fine, just explain it away with some technobabble. It feels like they just wanted to do a futuristic season for the sake of doing a futuristic season rather than actually having a solid, inspired idea for it. Another thing that really dragged this season down was its incredibly messy release schedule and how that affected its story structure. The previous 2 seasons were 13 episodes each, while Rebooted is only 8, so a good bit shorter. And it wasn't released consistently. Instead, they released 2 episodes at a time every few months throughout 2014. Episodes 1 and 2 came out in January, on my 11th birthday too, which was neat, 3 and 4 in April, 5 and 6 in July, and 7 and 8 in November. Each pair was kind of its own self-contained story and they would build on each other as the season went on, which was fine with multiple months between releases, but once it's completely out and you can binge the entire season whenever you want, it doesn't flow very well. Despite the messy premise and structure, I don't think the overall plot is that bad. Zane takes the lead as our main character this time around, and he's forced to fight what's basically an army of enhanced clones of him, which I love. Zane may be a robot, but he proves that he's so much more than that. Whereas the Ninjoid army are simply drones built to follow orders with limited sentience, Zane is a fully fledged person, despite what he's made of. I will say though, his link with Pixel doesn't make much sense. He gives her half his heart so she doesn't have to rely on the power grid anymore, and they very clearly establish that Zane now depends on Pixel to fight properly. But then he has absolutely zero issues with it again after that one episode. Right. That is more of a nitpick though, because it's only a thing for one episode. Also, the Jay, Cole, and Nia love triangle. What is the point of this? Why is this here? What does this add to the story?
Who writes this baloney?
Every time it comes up, it's nothing but annoying. And the moment when Lloyd gives up what's left of his golden power to give the ninja pure elemental powers that don't rely on their weapons anymore, even though that's what the Temple of Light was supposed to do the first time, and it was pretty obviously just a way to get all the ninja on roughly the same power level for future seasons. And once Lloyd gives up his power, the Overlord builds a rocket to track down a comet where the golden weapons landed last season. Friendly reminder, this is a show about ninjas. Also, what was the point of bringing Pythor back? He has no emotional stake in the conflict. His story in Season 1 wrapped up so nicely, why undo it? His role could have easily been filled by General Cryptor or basically anyone else. But despite all of its flaws, where this season really excels is the ending. Zane's sacrifice is a phenomenal scene. This was the first big TV moment to actually make me cry, and it still gets me to this day whenever I decide to rewatch it. Yeah, remember when death in this show actually meant something? I remember seeing this for the first time and I was already on the verge of tears when the flashback montage started, but when this happened...
You were built to protect those who cannot protect themselves.
I broke. I was a mess for the rest of the night after that. Rebooted's finale was absolutely amazing, but the rest of the season is such a nonsensical mess, which is why I officially rank this as an okay season. I'll be putting it between the pilot and Rise of the Snakes. Tournament of Elements is wonderful. This was the show's big return to form. We learned so much new lore and history, the characters are incredibly strong, and we got one of the most entertaining villains in the entire show's run. Let's start with the story. The ninja have all gone their separate ways following Zane's death, and after Lloyd manages to convince them to reunite, they're paid a visit by some thugs who leave a mysterious message. A man named Master Chen has invited the ninja to compete in his Tournament of Elements, bribing them into coming by telling them Zane is alive, and if they don't come, they'll never see him again. I love this because it gives the ninja a solid emotional reason to get back together and get involved in the conflict. For all they know, Zane's life is on the line, so what other choice do they have? Garmadon has quite a bit of history with Chen, which we learn about over the course of the season. Garmadon training under Chen as part of his transition to evil, the love triangle between him, Wu, and Misako, Chen causing the Serpentine Wars through deception, which also allows us to see the more complete Anachondri tribe instead of just Pythor, which I love, the introduction to the Cursed Realm, which also plays into the next season. Oh my god, there's so much juicy backstory here, and I love every second of it. This season also world builds a lot with the introduction of the other elemental masters. Some of the elements seem like weird choices, like speed, form, or metal. I especially want to mention metal here. I like Karloff as a character, he's pretty entertaining, but they missed so much potential with his powers. He doesn't really do anything with actual metal. All his element seems to do is make him bigger and more durable. But out of all the new elemental masters, my favorite is definitely Skylar. As Chen's daughter, she has the biggest arc of the season with stepping out of her father's shadow, and her power to emulate other elements is very creative, but I don't think they quite used it to its fullest potential. Despite that though, I love Skylar. A little salty she didn't officially join the ninja team, but I'm at least glad she stuck around as a recurring side character after this. Speaking of Chen, I think he's a fantastic villain. In a similar vein to Queen Scarlet from Wings of Fire, Chen's appeal comes from his unbridled charisma and his ability to manipulate others. He uses deception to turn the heroes against each other, and by the time they get past that, he has the tangible power he was after and is a genuine physical threat now. I do, however, have to question his plan a bit. His goal here is to steal the Elemental Master's powers and use them to cast a spell that'll turn his army of cultists into Anachondri, and he steals their powers when they lose the tournament. Wouldn't that mean he was kinda relying on all these people accepting his invitation? Also, the spell just so happens to not require the elements of wind, water, or time because those ones hadn't been introduced yet. They do try to remedy this much later in Skybound when Wu explains that water and wind don't belong to the first Spinjitzu Master, but that still doesn't explain time. It's kinda weird. As for Garmadon's sacrifice at the end of the season, it doesn't pack the same punch as Zane's, but I think it still hits the emotional beat pretty well. With how much the season focused on Garmadon and how much it revealed about him, it felt like a very fitting end to his story. Speaking of focus, if I had any major criticisms of the season, it's the lack of a solid focus character. This was supposed to be a Kai season. He's the one in the intro and on the box art for all the sets. He's the one who interacts the most with Skylar and has the biggest struggle against Chen. But the season also gives us a ton of Garmadon material, so in the last couple episodes they just kind of forget about Kai and put the spotlight on Lloyd instead. It's a pretty jarring shift. All that being said though, I love Tournament of Elements. I would go so far as to call this Ninjago's first truly great season. A lot of people rank this as their favorite season of all time, and I can definitely see why. Personally, I don't think it's the best ever, but it's up there. It's going at the top of the list for now, a spot well deserved, but it won't stay at the top for long. Because Possession is even better. When I first heard this season was going to be about ghosts, I thought it was just going to be super gimmicky and boring, but I was very pleasantly surprised. This season's villain is Moro, who I personally think is another one of Ninjago's best villains. He's a really interesting concept, the ghost of a student Sensei Wu had failed coming back to take revenge on him and the ninja. Having Moro possess Lloyd for most of the season was a good way to provide some challenge and extra emotional stakes for our heroes, and introducing the concept of the 16 realms was a great way to world build and widen the scope of the season. I do have to question why he seems to be convinced merely having the green ninja suit makes him the green ninja. What is his logic there? Still, great antagonist, and I love his reconciliation with Wu at the end. The biggest thing this season is remembered for is the huge status quo shift. Cole is a ghost now, the ninja have learned air jitsu, Lloyd is officially on the path to becoming a sensei, and the biggest one, Nia, becoming the water ninja. I feel like her powers kinda came out of nowhere, but I like that she's finally treated as one of the group. This season reveals an interesting tidbit about Nia that becomes a recurring thing in later seasons. Nia wants to be in control of her life and be able to contribute in her own way, and she had found that with Samurai X, so when she's suddenly told that she has to become something new for the good of Ninjago, her insecurities begin to surface and we see her struggle with learning how to go with the flow, pun entirely intended. Ronan was introduced in this season too, and I like him here. His carefree nature acts as a really good catalyst for Nia's arc. His appearances in later seasons kinda ruin him and he becomes really inconsistent, so I wish he was confined to this season, but at least in this season he's really good. If I had anything negative to say about Possession, it's that it kinda shares Tournament of Element's problem of not knowing who to focus on. This was apparently supposed to be a Nia season, but it doesn't feel like that at all. The first half is oddly obsessed with shitting on Kai with no payoff, and then the last few are about Lloyd clashing with Moro and stepping up to the plate of becoming a leader, which I love, but Nia's stuff is just in the background until the climax. Possession is still a great season though. I adore the darker tone, the emotional stakes and status quo changes are super interesting, and by all means this would have been a good place to end the series. In a lot of ways it really does feel like a finale, and for a while this was easily my favorite season. Possession is rightfully going at the top of the list. 2016 marked the start of a drop in quality for the series. I don't hate Skybound, but it didn't come close to hitting the same highs of previous seasons. Let's start with the villain, Nadakon the Jinn. He's entertaining enough, and I like his motivation in the first half of the season. Taking revenge on the ninja after destroying the Cursed Realm in the previous season resulted in the destruction of his home realm, but once he finds out about Nia, it becomes about him marrying Nia to become all-powerful and suddenly not caring about his pirate crew anymore. All his complexity just disappeared. Now Jay. This was Jay's spotlight season, and it pretty consistently stays focused on him, but Jay isn't very likable here. He comes off as intentionally manipulative in the first few episodes, and then the next few keep shitting on him to an unnecessary degree. I will say though, I really like his scenes with Nadakon. These are the only scenes where Nadakon actually feels like a more unique villain, and it's interesting to see him pick apart Jay's flaws and insecurities. The big thing I do love is Nia. Her arc from Possession continues here as she starts taking her frustrations out from being told what she has to be. I like her struggle with liking Jay but not wanting to make it official because it's just what everyone wants and expects. What she ultimately wants is for it to be her decision, which does happen. I want to mention Dareth here too. He's a good comic relief character in pretty much every other season he appears in, but Skybound is Dareth at his worst, turning him into an arrogant, sexist, infuriating asshole. The thing that really kills this season though is the ending. Jay's final wish just reverses time and undoes everything that happened, with only Jay and Nia for some reason remembering everything. I genuinely hate this because it basically makes the season totally skippable since nothing in it actually happened anymore or is ever brought up again. After 2015 gave us two of the show's best seasons, Skybound was a huge disappointment. I don't think it's bad, and it has some elements that I really like. It's just unsatisfying. I'm gonna place Skybound between Rebooted and Rise of the Snakes. And the downward spiral continues. I remember the hype train leading up to Day of the Departed when everyone thought this was season 7, only for it to turn out to be a 1-hour Halloween special. Great. Basically, Sensei Yang from Possession, who had turned Cole into a ghost, casts some kind of spell to manipulate Cole and get him to release the souls of a bunch of the ninja's past enemies, which proceed to possess the new museum mannequins of themselves and attack the ninja. All of this so Yang can escape the curse that's keeping him confined to his temple so he isn't forgotten. But even Cole points out how stupid that is because Yang invented air jitsu, of course he's gonna be remembered. And as fun as it is to have the ninja clash against old villains again, it's just not interesting. Having so many separate battles crammed into only an hour makes them all feel super rushed with no real stakes. The only things I like are that Moro decides to help the ninja, staying consistent with his little redemption at the end of Possession, and that Cole is no longer a ghost. I was never a huge fan of that plotline, and they didn't really do anything special with it, so I'm glad they just got rid of it. What really hurts is that all of the ninja up until this point have now gotten their own seasons. Season 1 was an ensemble cast, Season 2 was Lloyd's season, Zane got Season 3, Kai got Season 4, Nia got Season 5, and Jay got Season 6. But Cole just got a boring and clunky Halloween special. I would call Day of the Departed Ninjago's first truly bad installment. I really don't have much else to say about this one. It's lazy and forgettable, and it's just boring. Bottom of the list, at least for now. Hands of Time is widely regarded as Ninjago's worst season, but honestly, I disagree. Don't get me wrong, this is still a very flawed season, but I actually kinda like it. Acronix and Crux are pretty fun when they're bantering with each other, and I like their goal of getting back powers they had lost, but I wish their motivation for wanting to conquer Ninjago was more complex than thinking they had the superior elemental power. They also don't come off as very threatening because they don't get super involved in the conflict past the first few episodes and at the very end, and every scene with them tries to shoehorn in some kind of comedy no matter how serious the scene is supposed to be. Kai and Nia share the spotlight this season, and this is where they at long last find their parents. It's nice to finally have that plotline come to a close, but I wish Rei and Maya were given more personality. They would much later on, but not here. Lloyd gets some development too, with him officially stepping up to the plate as the ninja's leader when Wu was put out of commission. I really like that they followed up on Lloyd's choice to work towards becoming a sensei from possession. Skybound only mentioned it like once, and it wasn't a thing at all in Day of the Departed, so I'd kinda assumed they had just forgotten about it. As for the new Samurai X, I'm indifferent, but in hindsight I think it was a bit too obvious it was Pixel. And of course, it kinda fell apart at the end due to being a time travel plot, but this isn't as bad as what they tried to do in Season 2. All that happens here is that Acronix and Crux almost changed the outcome of an important battle, but Kai and Nia managed to set things right, so there's not really any glaring paradoxes left behind. Wu's sacrifice at the end is pretty well done as well, and that combined with Lloyd's development is a great setup for Sons of Garmadon. All of that being said though, the majority of the episodes, particularly in the middle, are pretty standard and don't really offer anything to make them stand out. It kinda feels like they're going back to the feel of Season 1 with how these battles play out, which is only made even more apparent by the fact that the minions this season are even more snake people. I think the animation is worth noting as well. It took a major downturn this season. The movements are really clunky, all the characters look even more like plastic toys than before, and the lighting just looks off. I don't know what happened here, but Hands of Time is just so visually dull. So I would reluctantly call this season decent. It had a lot of good things in it, more so than Skybound, but for every good thing it does, I feel it takes a step back in other places. Lloyd got some good development, and it was great to see Kai and Nia finally find their parents, but the villains weren't very interesting, and a lot of the fight scenes felt very dull. I'm gonna put Hands of Time between Skybound and Rise of the Snakes. It's right on the line between okay and good. After the release of Hands of Time in early 2017, the show would go on a bit of a hiatus. Since 2015, the show had been on a pattern of 2 major releases each year, but 2017's second release would be something a little different, having very little to do with the show itself, the LEGO Ninjago movie. This movie was not canon to the show, it was part of the other LEGO movies Warner Brothers had made, so I won't be talking about it here. It would, however, have some significant consequences for the show, which I'll go into in more depth next time when we cover the Oni and Dragon era. This has been Wings of Charcoal, and I'll see you all in the next video.